Welcome back to Dieu Han RV. Thank you for making time to join us today. We know life can be busy, so your presence here means the world to us. This channel has grown because of your love, your comments, and your support. Every click, every watch, every share, it all matters more than we can say. So please get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's step gently into the next chapter of Dieu Han's journey. By the way, what time is it where you are? And which part of the world are you watching from? Drop us a comment below. We truly read every single one and it means so much to us. We're building a community here, and your voice is part of it. Now, today's episode picks up right where things left off. In today's episode, something unusual is happening. Inside a quiet village home, 3 different men show up, all with some kind of connection to a single mother named Dieu Han. What brought them here, to this very house? And what will happen when all their emotions collide under one roof? One of them used to be close to her, another had feelings but stayed silent. The last, he once asked her to be his girlfriend. Now, fate has brought them all together. Are these just coincidences? Or is there a deeper story waiting to unfold before our eyes? The house is filled with tension and unspoken thoughts. Glances are exchanged. Smiles seem polite, but something else lingers. Has this quiet home become the center of a silent emotional war? And in the heart of it all, is Dieu Han the reason behind it? This is more than just a visit. It's a gathering of feelings, old wounds, hopes, and jealousy. Each man has his own reason for being here, but no one knows how this story will end. Not even Dieu Han herself. Are we watching the start of something, or the end? If you've been following Dieu Han's journey, you know this moment could change everything. What do you think will happen next? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to Dieu Han RV, and hit the bell so you never miss an update. Then gave a confident smile, looking directly at Dan. He said loudly that some people talk, but others get things done. Dan laughed, folding his arms, and replied that no one has ever seen them build anything except castles in the air. The air suddenly felt heavier. Neither raised their voice, but their words were sharp. Was this still just about helping Dieu Han? Or something more? They both wanted to prove something, and she was quietly watching. Dan took a step forward, voice calm but firm. He said if helping Dieu Han was the goal, then maybe they should compare results. Then raised an eyebrow and said that actions speak louder than promises. They were fencing with words, and each sentence was a blade around them. The yard remained quiet, but their conversation was anything but. It wasn't a fight, not yet, but the tension was rising with every breath. All for one woman's here. Then crossed his arms and said Dieu Han needed stability, not empty compliments. Then shook his head and countered, saying that real support doesn't always need to be loud. There was no shouting, only tight smiles and piercing words. Each man claimed to understand her better. Each believed they could give her more, but none of them asked what she wanted. They were too busy competing, and somewhere deep inside, it hurt her. Dan tilted his head and said, if then really cared, he would have shown up sooner. Dan's jaw tightened, but he smiled and said, maybe showing up late is better than not caring at all. They weren't yelling, they were fencing with smiles. Every word was chosen with care and a little pain. Neither wanted to lose, not just for pride, but because both had already pictured a life with Dieu Han, and neither could bear the thought of losing it. Dan said he'd known Han longer, helped her through darker days. Dan replied that sometimes it's not about how long, but how deeply. The words hit harder than fists. They didn't need to fight with hands. Their hearts were already at war. Each believed he was the one she should choose. Each moment stretched, silent but heavy. Han could feel it all, the quiet tension of 2 men wanting to be her shelter. Will words decide who deserves her heart, or will actions speak louder in the end? As the quiet battle continued, Han stood nearby, smiling gently, but inside, her emotions were tangled. She didn't ask for this attention, but now she had to choose who truly understands her. In the small kitchens, Dieu Han and Trin stood side by side. The clatter of pans and the sizzle of oil blended with their quiet laughter. Steam curled from the pot, carrying a warm scent of garlic and herbs. Trin tasted the broth and gave a dramatic nod of approval. Dieu Han smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. For a moment, everything outside those walls disappeared, but beneath it all, thoughts still lingered. The day was far from over. Trin turned to Han and teased her about how many men were suddenly interested. Dieu Han chuckled, brushing it off, but her cheeks turned slightly red. The smell of lemongrass and chili filled the air. Outside, the men were still working. Unaware of the quiet conversation happening within, the kitchen felt warmer. Not just from the fire, but from their growing bond. Though they came from different worlds, today they shared a rhythm. Between spices and stories, they found connection, and a quiet understanding began to form. Han stirred the pan gently, lost in thought for a moment. They worked in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet shared between people who had been through storms. Each stir of the spoon, each sprinkle of salt, carried more than just flavor. It held memories, hope, and the weight of decisions waiting outside that door. Dinner was almost ready, but hearts were still full of questions. Outside, laughter echoed faintly from the yard. Inside, Trin and Han shared a glance, then burst out laughing over a burnt pancake. For just that second, the tension of the day melted. Trin reached over to fix Han's apron. There was something healing about simple work, about cooking, about not needing to explain everything. But both women knew, once the food was served, the real dinner would begin, and with it, everything unspoken would sit down at the table too. Trin stepped out with a cheerful smile, watching Then and Dan digging in the garden. He wiped his hands and offered, "Let me help you guys. I'm good with a hoe too." Then glanced up, shook his head gently. "Thanks, Trin, but we're almost done here." Dan added, "Yeah, just a few more rows to finish." Trin stood there for a moment, smile fading slightly, then nodded and folded his hands behind his back. Trying to hide his disappointment, Trin chuckled softly and took a few steps closer. "You guys are fast. I barely blinked, and the garden's already neat." Dan laughed politely. "We're just trying to impress Han, honestly." Then smirked but kept his eyes on the soil. Trin forced another smile, though something inside stirred. He wanted to be part of this too, not just a guest watching from afar. The sun bore down, but the silence between the men was heavier. Then continued digging while Dan raked the loose soil. Trin lingered by the edge, unsure where he belonged in this picture. He clasped his hands together and said, "Well, I'll just watch and learn from the experts then." His tone was light, but his chest felt tight. There was a battle here. Silent, invisible, but real. From the kitchen door, Dieu Han watched the scene unfold. She shook her head slightly, half amused, half overwhelmed. 3 grown men fighting to weed a patch of garden. "All right, heroes," she called out with a smile. "Lunch is ready. Come in before the food gets cold." They froze, then dropped the tool first. Dan followed, and Trin flashed a grin. Just like that, the competition paused, but the tension, unspoken, still lingered beneath every step. Trin walked ahead, cheerful as ever, joking, "I hope you made something spicy, Han. I work better after heat." Dan smirked and muttered, "She probably didn't cook just for you, you know." Dan stayed silent, eyes watching both men carefully. The air between them buzzed with words and said. Every joke had a sharp edge, every look had weight. Even the walk to the table felt like another round of a battle no one dared to name.
As they entered the house, the aroma of freshly cooked food wrapped around them. Steam rose from the dishes Han had prepared, warm and inviting. She stood by the table, wiping her hands. Smiling politely, "Sit wherever you like," she said, but no one moved first, then looked at Han. Then at the 2 men behind him, then made a step. Trin paused, choosing. A seat suddenly felt strategic, as if it declared something more than just hunger.
No one spoke at first. Only the soft clink of spoons and quiet sips filled the air. Dieu Han offered rice to each man, her smile gentle but tired. Dan thanked her softly. Trin nodded, then met her eyes briefly. Under the surface, waves of tension rolled quietly. It wasn't just lunch anymore. It was the unspoken question hovering in the air. Who belongs in this home? Who would Dieu Han's heart choose if she had to? Then Tring cracked a joke, light but pointed. Dan replied with a chuckle, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Dan said nothing, but kept eating slowly, thoughtfully. Dieu Han watched them all, pretending not to notice. She had cooked with love, but the food couldn't cover the taste of unspoken tension. Her home, once quiet and safe, now pulsed with emotions too big to name. She wondered if they realized she was listening more with her heart than her ears. There was laughter at the table, light and polite, but behind every smile was a careful silence. Dieu Han tried to relax, but something felt fragile, like the piece could shatter at any moment. The way they praised her food felt almost rehearsed. The men kept watching each other, even while chewing. It wasn't tension you could name, just something in the air. Everyone was trying to enjoy the moment, but no one was truly at ease inside. The conversation drifted from food to weather, then to small jokes, as if avoiding something bigger. Dieu Han nodded and smiled in all the right places, but her mind kept circling back to the glances exchanged across the table. The air was thick with unspoken meanings. They were all here together, yet each one seemed to be guarding something. It should have been a simple meal. Instead, it became a quiet game of watching, waiting, wondering. No one said it out loud, but the meal felt like a test. Every gesture, every comment was weighed. Who poured the tea first? Who passed the bowl next? Dieu Han tried not to overthink it, but her chest stayed tight. It was strange how quiet competition could taste bitter even in a warm, happy meal. Each man tried to appear calm, but something in their voices trembled. It wasn't a fight, not yet. But it was something close enough to make hearts race. The longer they sat, the more carefully everyone measured their words. Compliments were given, but with eyes that kept watching. Jokes landed, but laughter didn't reach the eyes. Dieu Han wished it could be just joy, just connection. But this wasn't a meal with friends. It was a careful dance of timing and tone. She felt like the center of something none of them wanted to name. And part of her feared, what if no matter how well this went, someone would still get hurt? Dieu Han looked around the table, wondering if anyone else felt the weight she carried. They smiled, spoke, reached for more food. But beneath it all was something fragile. Not anger, not jealousy, but a quiet, aching hope clinging to every word. She wasn't blind. She saw how they tried, how they waited. And it broke something in her too. She didn't want to choose. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about food anymore. So, who will she choose in the end? And what if the choice hurts more than healing anyone? The love, the past, the silence, they're all sitting at the same table now. And Dieu Han knows deep down, peace won't come easily. If you've ever faced a heart torn between kindness and history, this is your moment. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Dieu Han RV, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next.